You tell me how a president in the middle of a pandemic has got time for this bullshit.
The story of Canadian oil is, in many ways, a tragedy of unfulfilled potential. For decades, the nation has possessed one of the world's largest proven oil reserves, a vast ocean of crude beneath the northern earth. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Yet, for just as long, it has been a resource in chains, a captive commodity in search of a path to market. This isn't a new struggle. It's a saga as old as the oil boom itself, and it has left deep, emotional scars on the Canadian psyche. To understand the jubilation and anxiety of today's events, you first have to understand the ghosts that haunt this story, the ghosts of pipelines past. Imagine a country blessed with a treasure trove, but with only one door out of the vault. For Canada, that door has always been to the south, to the United States. Since the early days of oil exploration, a sprawling network of pipelines was built to service this one customer, creating a deep, almost familial bond between the two nations' energy sectors. It was a relationship built on convenience and proximity, but it was also a relationship built on dependency. For years, this was the way things were, and nobody questioned it. The oil flowed south, the money flowed north, and life went on. But then, the world began to change. The Canadian energy sector, a powerful engine of the national economy, started to feel the pinch of this one-sided arrangement. The United States, having its own energy revolution with the rise of shale oil, began to act less like a partner and more like a competitor. The door to the vault, once wide open, was now being held ajar with a skeptical eye. Canada's leaders, its oil executives, and its workers all began to ask the same question. What if that door was to be closed? This quiet anxiety gave birth to a dream of reaching new markets, of breaking free from the chokehold of a single customer. It was the dream of a new pipeline, a massive artery that would carry Canadian crude not south to the American heartland, but west of the Pacific coast. From there, it could be loaded onto tankers and sent to the dynamic, energy-hungry economies of Asia. This was not just a business plan. It was a vision for a new kind of Canadian sovereignty, a declaration that the nation would no longer be a landlocked hostage. But a dream of that magnitude inevitably collides with reality. What followed was a decade of conflict that tore at the very fabric of Canadian society. The idea of a new pipeline became a lightning rod for every major political, economic, and environmental debate in the country. It wasn't just a proposal, it was a battleground. On one side stood the proponents, the oil industry, labor unions, and a government desperate to find a new path to prosperity. They spoke of jobs, of national interest, and of finally realizing the true value of Canada's resources. Their voices were a mix of pragmatism and a deep-seated frustration with the status quo. They painted a picture of a nation held back, its potential squandered by a lack of will. On the other side stood a powerful coalition of environmental groups, First Nations communities, and urban progressives. Their arguments were just as compelling and just as emotionally charged. They spoke of the existential threat of climate change, of the sacred duty to protect the land and water, and of broken promises to Indigenous peoples whose territories would be crossed by the new pipeline. They saw the project not as a symbol of progress, but as a dangerous step backward, a betrayal of future generations. Their voices were fueled by a moral certainty, a conviction that some things are more important than profit. The result was a bitter, protracted war of attrition. Lawsuits were filed, protests erupted, and political careers were made and broken on the issue. The dream of a new pipeline, of a new destiny, seemed to be slipping away. We saw projects like the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which would have carried oil to the Pacific, collapse under the weight of opposition. The Keystone XL pipeline, designed to increase capacity to the U.S., became an international symbol of the climate change debate, ultimately canceled by an American president. These weren't just infrastructure projects. They were symbols of a nation divided, a country grappling with its identity in a rapidly changing world. Every canceled project was a gut punch to the Canadian energy sector, a confirmation of its worst fears. This is the world Marcus and his colleagues were born into. They're the inheritors of this long, painful struggle. The sense of being landlocked, of being at the mercy of a single customer, is not an abstract concept to them. It's a lived reality. They saw their jobs threatened, their communities struggle, and their way of life questioned by those who saw their work not as a source of national wealth, but as a source of national shame. It created a deep-seated feeling of being misunderstood and undervalued, a sense that the very foundation of their lives was built on shifting sand. This is the emotional bedrock of today's story. It is a story not of a sudden opportunity, but of a quiet, decades-long desperation, a search for a lifeline that seemed, for so long, impossible to find. So, when the news of China's record purchases began to trickle in, it wasn't just a business headline. It was a moment of vindication for some, a terrifying unknown for others, and a powerful, deeply emotional turning point for a nation that had been waiting for a new path for what felt like an eternity. The ghosts of pipelines past are not gone, but their shadows are now competing with a new and powerful light from the east. The stage is now set for a drama that will play out not just on the world's economic stage, but in the hearts and minds of people like Marcus, whose lives hang in the balance. To fully grasp the significance of a new buyer for Canadian oil, you have to understand the old one. For decades, the United States didn't just buy Canadian crude. It was the entire market. This created a relationship that, while convenient and largely stable, was far from equal. It was a silent chokehold, an economic reality that left Canada's energy sector vulnerable and, at times, voiceless. This dependency wasn't just a matter of trade. It shaped national policy, limited ambition, and created a quiet but profound sense of being a junior partner in a relationship of giants. Think of it this way. Imagine owning a brilliant handcrafted product, but having only one store in the world that will sell it for you. That store is also your biggest competitor and, at any moment, can decide to change the price, slow down its orders, or even stop buying altogether. This is the reality Canada's oil industry lived with for generations. The sheer size and proximity of the American market made it the natural destination for a commodity that, by its very nature, is difficult and expensive to transport over long distances. Pipelines flowed south, infrastructure was built to support this one-way street, and the entire ecosystem of the Canadian oil sands was designed with a single customer in mind. This arrangement worked well enough for a time. The demand from the U.S. was steady, and Canada was seen as a reliable, secure source of energy. But the underlying power imbalance was always there, simmering beneath the surface. It was a relationship of necessity, not always of choice. The first cracks in this foundation began to appear with the American shale oil boom. Suddenly, the U.S. was no longer as dependent on foreign oil as it once was. Its own domestic production soared, and the need for Canadian crude, while still present, became less urgent. The market dynamics shifted dramatically. Canada's most valuable customer was now its fiercest competitor. The consequences were immediate and painful. Canadian oil began selling at a significant discount compared to global benchmarks. This wasn't because it was of lower quality, it was because it had nowhere else to go. Trapped in a landlocked situation with limited pipeline capacity and only one major buyer, Canadian producers were forced to accept lower prices. This discount, often referred to as the WCS discount for Western Canadian Select, a type of heavy crude, became a symbol of the country's economic vulnerability. It was a daily reminder that Canada was at the mercy of a market it couldn't control. I once spoke with a veteran oil patch analyst who described the situation with a simple, powerful analogy. It was like we were selling apples at a farmer's market, and the only person with a cart big enough to take them all was our neighbor. He knew we couldn't sell them anywhere else.